News Special Report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Hello, everyone. We come on the air because President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner, is at the microphone. Let's listen.
To run for president, I served his campaign the best I could because I believe in him and his ability to improve the lives of all Americans. And now, serving the president and the people of the United States has been the honor and privilege of a lifetime. I am so grateful for the opportunity to work on important matters such as Middle East peace and reinvigorating America's innovative spirit. Every day, I come to work with enthusiasm and excitement for what can be. I have not sought the spotlight. First in business and now in public service, I have always focused on setting and achieving goals and have left it to others to work on media and public perception. Since the first questions were raised in March, I have been consistent in saying that I was eager to share any information I have with the investigating bodies, and I've done so today. The record and documents I have voluntarily provided will show that all of my actions were proper and occurred in the normal course of events of a very unique campaign. Let me be very clear. I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so. I had no improper contacts. I have not relied on Russian funds for my businesses. And I have been fully transparent in providing all requested information. Donald Trump had a better message and ran a smarter campaign, and that is why he won. Suggesting otherwise ridicules those who voted for him. It is an honor to work with President Trump and his administration as we take on the challenges that he was elected to face. Creating jobs for American people, keeping America safe, and eliminating barriers to achieving the American dream. Thank you very much, and I look forward to taking questions from the House committee tomorrow. Thank you.
And there you have it. President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, now, of course, a senior advisor inside the West Wing, heading back into the West Wing of the White House right now. We know he spent more than 2 hours this morning on Capitol Hill meeting with staffers with the Senate Intelligence Committee, not the senators themselves, but the staffers. But these are high-level staffers who are doing much of the investigating and the gathering, the fact-finding, if you will, before the senators at some point, if that point comes, will actually question some of these principles as they investigate any possible collusion. I do want to bring in Mary Bruce. She was on Capitol Hill for us. You watched Jared Kushner both go in and go out. This was, as I mentioned, more than a 2-hour meeting. But, Mary, it wasn't expected to be a grilling, more of a fact-finding mission?
That's exactly right, David. And Jared Kushner was all smiles here as he walked into and out of this meeting here. You mentioned more than 2.5 hours with staffers on this committee. This was the first time the congressional investigators had a chance to question a member of the Trump family about any possible ties to Russia. Now, of course, we don't know what questions were asked or what answers were given because this was all behind closed doors. But we did see that 11-page statement that Kushner put out overnight. And now hearing his statement now, he says point blank he did not collude. We know that he has detailed 4 interactions he had with Russians, but he says that none of them were improper. The question now going forward is whether the answers he provided here are going to be enough to satisfy investigators. And it seems that while this is the first meeting that Kushner is having here on the Hill, it may not be the last. Already we're seeing some harsh words from members of this committee. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon has come out and said that Kushner's response, that paper statement, simply is not enough. He says it raises far more questions than answers. He and others are calling for Kushner to return to the Hill, return to this committee, testify in open before the American public.
Already calls for him to return. Mary Bruce, thanks for your live reporting there on the Hill. And as Mary just mentioned, he said, I did not collude. He went on to say, I had no improper contacts with the Russians, and I did not rely on Russian funds for my business. I do want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, who was at the White House. That was quite extraordinary to see him. He has had a somewhat of a low profile since his father-in-law became president, and he said he's never sought the public eye, but he's at the center of this storm, John.
He sure is, and he has had an incredibly low profile. It was a couple of months into this administration before many people had ever even heard his voice, David. But on this one, he is making a point to be out there to give the impression that he is being fully transparent. Before he went and answered questions today to the Senate Intelligence Committee, he released an 11-page statement of what he had said. And then we heard him today, the first appearance at that White House stakeout where you have seen so many other officials and visitors come out. Jared's first appearance there. And he said, the bottom line, all of my actions were proper. And of course, as you mentioned, no collusion. He didn't take part of it, and he didn't know of any collusion. I tried to ask him as he was leaving whether or not he would be willing to testify in public and under oath. He did not answer that question, but that is the demand that we are hearing from some on Capitol Hill, especially from Democrats, that he come up in public, testify, and under oath.
Did not answer the question, but of course, as you point out, it is the question looming. John, one more question for you. In a sign that he knew his boss was watching, the president, he said Donald Trump ran a better campaign, had a better message. That's why he's here. Even Jared Kushner out there today trying to turn the focus off of this Russia investigation.
And what really irritates the president, we are told, and I've heard this directly from the president, is the notion that the Russians somehow tilted the scales in this election and that his election victory was not legitimate. That is the thing that angers, that is the suggestion that angers the president more than anything. That's why you hear him push back so strongly against this investigation, call it a witch hunt, and still repeatedly invoke Hillary Clinton in those responses.
And again today, John Carl, the White House, with our live reporting. John, our thanks to you and to Mary Bruce. Jared Kushner saying it went very well today on Capitol Hill. When asked how many questions did you answer the questions? He said, I answered as many questions as they asked. But as Mary Bruce pointed out, already calls for him to return to the Hill. We'll have team coverage coming up later. And of course, our coverage continues throughout the afternoon at abcnews.com and ABC Digital. And to get text alerts, download the ABC News app. Of course, I'll see you for World News Tonight. Until then, have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Hi guys, I'm Amna Nawaz live in New York. Continuing coverage now as Jared Kushner is the first member of the Trump family to be questioned in relation to the investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election, has concluded his trip to Capitol Hill, giving a statement right there outside of the White House. Let's break down what we know so far and what we could expect to see in the weeks ahead now. Mary Alice Parks joins us live from the Washington, D.C. Bureau. Mary Alice, as we heard mentioned there by some of our colleagues, this is not a man we hear from often, but he shared a few words there, making a very, very strong point to say, I did not collude. I have never used Russian banks to finance my businesses, and I have never done anything improper. Is that the end of the questions, we think, for Jared Kushner?
Probably not. You know, he'll be back on Capitol Hill tomorrow talking to staff on the House side, the House Intelligence Committee. But there are several other committees investigating the Russian meddling as well. A Judiciary Committee in the Senate that wants sort of a crack at all of these top political players, too. I think it is highly likely that Kushner will have to face more questions from investigators and investigators at DOJ. I mean, don't forget the special counsel has extreme reach in this area and could call Kushner to testify as well.
Let me ask you about this, because I think this is something a lot of people are wondering about. This was a closed-door session, right? We know there's been a lot of calls for anyone involved in these kind of investigations to appear before an open committee, an open hearing. Do we know why it was closed, and do we know what exactly went on behind those closed doors?
Well, we know that he met with staff, not the senators themselves, staff that have been working really closely on this investigation. Obviously, staff does a lot of the behind-the-scenes work on big projects on Capitol Hill. Senators can't be everywhere all the time, reading every page and every document. And why it was behind closed doors, you know, that's really interesting. I think because it's seen as a first step, right? These committees are trying to work with these principals. They're asking for documents. They're not subpoenaing them yet. They're asking for them to respond to questions and interviews, not yet testify under oath. They're seeing this as a process, hoping that these witnesses will be cooperative. And as long as they are, they can have a working relationship with investigators. But we've seen these lawmakers threaten that if for some reason these members of the White House team, the campaign, former campaign advisors start to not cooperate, start to not respond, don't answer questions, then lawmakers have said they will subpoena. They will absolutely make sure that they come. And then we're talking about a much different game, swearing someone in under oath, making it public, turning the cameras on. So this is an early stage, but again, more indication that there's more to come.
Hey, let's talk to John Karl now, ABC's chief White House correspondent who joins us live from the White House. John, what are we hearing from the White House about Mr. Kushner's testimony? I mean, in perspective, when you look at the big overall investigation, from Jared Kushner to the president is one of the shortest and straightest lines you can draw in terms of relationships in the West Wing. What are we hearing from them today?
Well, absolutely. Well, I think you heard the message from Jared Kushner. The key part of that message, beyond his absolute emphatic denial of taking part in any collusion with the Russians or knowing of any collusion with anybody else on that campaign, was the very firm statement from Jared Kushner that that the president's victory in the election was legitimate. The reason why that's important is this whole investigation is seen by the President of the United States as an effort to undermine his election victory over Hillary Clinton. That's why you hear him so angrily, call this a witch hunt and denounce those asking the questions here. So I thought it was significant that you heard that from Jared Kushner. It wasn't particularly relevant to what happened today in terms of the actual testimony, because nobody has suggested that the election victory is somehow illegitimate. It's a question of whether or not in the meddling in the election of the Russians, whether or not they had any collusion with anybody on the Trump team. Nobody has suggested that Russian meddling was decisive in this election, but he pushed back against that, I think, primarily because that is the way the president sees this. He sees this entire thing not just as a witch hunt, but as an attempt to undermine his election victory.
That's right, John. We've heard that again and again, that reference to a witch hunt on Twitter. Thanks for joining us, though. Always good to talk to you. John Karl at the White House.
Thanks, Alma.
Let's head now over to Capitol Hill. ABC's congressional correspondent Mary Bruce was outside the room in which Mr. Kushner was taking those questions. And Mary, it's not just business as usual there on the Hill. We're talking about members of the president's family himself appearing there. What are you hearing about how people are processing those questions and those answers he gave today?
Yeah, Amna, this was the first time, in fact, that a member of the Trump family was up here facing congressional investigators. The first time they had a chance to ask a member of the family their questions about any possible ties to Russia, any possible connections during the campaign. And this was a press scrum unlike we've ever seen. This is not a normal business as usual day up here on Capitol Hill, as you mentioned. But remember, this all happened behind closed doors. So we don't know what questions were asked. We don't know what answers were given. We do know that Jared Kushner spent a little over 2.5 hours here with members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. None of the actual senators on this committee were present. These were their high-level staff members. And that's also an indication of the fact that while this is Jared Kushner's first appearance here on the Hill, this is probably not likely his last appearance before this committee. He will be back up here tomorrow over on the House side. But already you're seeing members of this committee, of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Democrats in particular, calling for Kushner to come back up before this committee to appear in public under oath so that the American public, can hear his responses to so many of their questions.
And Mary, we heard Mr. Kushner say there he's going to be back there, as you mentioned, to talk to members of the House and to promise full transparency and cooperation moving forward. So probably not the last time we hear from him. Our thanks to you, Mary Bruce, on Capitol Hill. Mary Alice Parks, it brings us back to the bigger question. There's a promise of transparency here. There is a pledge to continue to cooperate. How does this move forward now? What is the next step for someone like Jared Kushner when we know these questions are going to continue?
You know, I thought it was interesting. Mary talked about some of the responses that are coming in already from Democrats. Ron Wyden, a senator on the committee, put out a statement saying that Jared Kushner has not been forthcoming in details so far. He had to revise his security clearance forms and some of his ethics forms. So why in the world should lawmakers take him at his word now? Why should they take that opening statement as a full statement of all the truth and all the facts? So a lot of skepticism from Democrats. And we're going to just continue to see, I I think that level of questioning, constant questioning, until lawmakers and investigators at DOJ feel satisfied that they've really investigated what Russia was capable of doing and did do in the election. You know, the other thing that really struck me about his opening statement, those prepared remarks that they released this morning, was how much Jared Kushner was talking about himself. When he was going to go speak to these staff members, he was not speaking, it seemed, as a member of this White House team or even his family. It was a lot of me, what I did, what I know, largely throwing a lot of other people sort of under the bus, placing blame. So you got the sense of a real defensive man who's worked very closely with his lawyers to craft a statement to make sure that he is in the clear. And that idea, that mindset that everyone in that team is sort of looking out for themselves, that means that they might have a lot more questions to answer for.
Mary Alice, I want to talk about that statement a little bit more because it's getting a little crowded under that bus. But let me come back to you in just a second because I want to put some of this into context in the larger investigation. For that, let's bring in our colleague Pierre Thomas, ABC's Chief Justice correspondent. Pierre, help us understand a little bit about how the question and answer session today, behind closed doors by Senate Intelligence Committee staffers, fits into the larger picture of the ongoing investigations here.
So the big question, obviously, is did members of the Trump campaign collude with the Russians? And there are a number of meetings that Kushner has acknowledged having with Russian officials, with the then Russian ambassador to the United States, Kislyak, with a Russian banker, and he was a part of that now infamous meeting, if you will, in which Donald Trump Jr. Convened at Trump Tower to speak with a Russian attorney and others from Russia. And again, the premise of the meeting, according to a document released to the press, is that the meeting was about dirt on Hillary Clinton, then candidate Hillary Clinton, that the Russians allegedly were going to provide as a part of their effort to help then candidate Donald Trump. So that's the backdrop of all of this. And the special counsel's office is looking into all of it. And statement notwithstanding today, appearance notwithstanding on Capitol Hill, the special prosecutor is going to look at every aspect of this and is going to look at, for example, who knew about the emails before the meeting, who else beyond Jared Kushner may have communicated about those emails. So that is all going to be investigated. And what you're seeing is, in terms of the statement, the appearance, is that everyone who's involved, who's had some kind of contact with the Russians, are going to have their day where the special counsel is going to look at what they did, and they're going to have to speak for themselves.
Pierre, I think the other thing people are wondering, I don't know if we know the answer to this, but whatever comes from today's meeting, whether there are notes or a transcript or whatever, could that be made part of the special counsel's investigation? Would Bob Mueller and his team have access to this as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they will get information from the Senate staff people. One would think they've had a pretty good working relationship. They'll want to know everything that was asked and answered to compare for the point from which they may interview him. Also, the statement, which has now been released to the press, that now goes into the investigative coffers, if you will, to be examined. So from this point forward, everything that has been said will be scrutinized and looked at, and they're doing investigations surrounding his comments, looking at other people to determine what the facts are.
Pierre Thomas, live for us in D.C. Thank you, Pierre. Always good to talk.
Pleasure.
Mary Alice, let's talk about that statement now, because there were a couple of things worth pointing out here. And I should just point everyone to abcnews.com. We have the statement up in full if you do want to read all 11 pages of it. But there were two questions going into this, Mary Alice. One, two among many others. One about the June 2016 meeting we've heard so much about that Donald Trump Jr. set up, ended up being with a Russian attorney with ties to the Kremlin and many others. And the second issue was about the disclosures on the security clearance application form. And on both of those, as you hinted earlier, he sort of blames other people. When it comes to the meeting, Mr. Kushner said, look, Junior set that up. I didn't even read all my emails all the way through, and then I left the meeting as soon as I realized it wasn't worth my time. And on the security clearance, he basically says it was my assistant's fault. She submitted it too early. Is that a viable defense? Is this sort of what we're going to continue to see in the way of explanations?
Well, that's exactly what the investigators will have to decide. Is that a viable defense? He works really hard to wash his hands of it. Like you said, there is very little, if any, personal responsibility taken. And it's interesting what he left out. You know, he does not seem to be bothered at all in defending his brother-in-law. He does not say, as the president has, that anyone would have taken that meeting or that he thought it was appropriate for his brother-in-law to set it up. Instead, he says he didn't read the whole email exchange, implying that if he had, maybe he would have made a different decision. And then you're right with the security clearance forms as well. He continues to play this card, paint this picture that he's a political novice, he's new to the game, he doesn't understand exactly how things work, his assistant made a mistake, doing a lot to put pressure off of himself to clear his name. But remember, if he's such a political novice, then you can ask, why has the president trusted him with so much? I mean, this is a senior White House advisor with a huge sweeping portfolio. So it's hard to sort of square that circle that he could both be so naive, but also has such a big role in this campaign and this White House.
It's going to be interesting to see how that defense continues to play out and whether it continues to have credibility. Hey, let's just head back over to Capitol Hill for just a second. Our colleague Armando Garcia has been outside that hearing room where Mr. Kushner was taking questions earlier today. And Armando, we talked to Mary Bruce a little bit ago. She was talking about some of the sights and sounds there, how it's not really business as normal, but Mr. Kushner's now left. Give us the latest. What's it like there right now?
Well, I got to tell you, I was staking out right there, right in front of the hearing room, and I can say that it was very, very quiet out here. In fact, there was a little bit of a comic relief once Kushner came in through those doors down there today because he quickly ducked out of the way of the camera, actually. So we were all staked out there for many, many hours and waiting for him to appear, and he was maybe in front of the camera for about 5-10 seconds.
Yeah, we're seeing tape from that earlier today. Of course, those cameras staking out Mr. Kushner's arrival and his departure. Armando, could you get a sense from anyone there of how you describe him? Was he relaxed in his demeanor? Was he saying anything to the reporters? This is a man, as we've talked about, who doesn't really like the attention.
No, he was actually very relaxed, but what did kind of stir the pot a little bit was a protester that waved the Russian flag right in front of him and asked him to sign it. So that actually got a lot of photographs and a lot of reporters kind of surrounding this guy.
Armando Garcia live for us on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Armando. And Mary Alice Parks, before I let you go, let's put this whole day into context a little bit here. We know that Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort, Mr. Trump's former campaign manager, will face some questions as well. We know that Mr. Kushner, as he said, is going to talk to the House Intelligence Committee as well. How does this White House continue on a unified front, and especially now that everybody is lawyering up?
Right. You know, this is the biggest story in D.C. for two reasons. One, because it is a public reminder of just how far these investigations have gone, not only into the walls of the White House and the West Wing, but into Trump's own family. But it's also the second biggest headline, the biggest headline in D.C. today, because there's really nothing else happening on Capitol Hill. You know, they want so badly to pass something on health care. Republicans trying so hard to get something done, and yet, by all accounts, they are absolutely deadlocked, both sides of that conference not giving. And so as much as this White House is asking for there to be a pivot to his agenda, to legislation and policy, there is frankly just not that much on that front to discuss. And so it is hard for the White House to get out from under this cloud unless they manage to get something else done. And everyone on Capitol Hill is really feeling that today.
We'll have to wait and see what happens on that then. Mary Alice Parks, live for us in Washington, D.C. Always good to talk to you, Mary Alice. Thanks.
Thanks, Amna.
Thanks to all of you for watching as well. Remember, you can always go to abcnews.com at any time for continuing coverage of this story and many others. For now, I'm Amna Nawaz, and I'll see you back here soon.